Before I start, as we do with every event that we do at the university, we of course recall the 58 hostages who are still in Gaza. We're delighted that Idan Alexander was freed yesterday and is home with his family. But we hope and pray that all the others will be freed soon, now. So good afternoon, and welcome to this special occasion as we introduce the Young Family School of Human Experience. This is another exciting chapter in our university's journey, one that reflects our deep commitment to the future and to the role our graduates will play in it. At the heart of the Young Family School of Human Experience lies a profound question. What does it mean to be human, particularly in this day and age? This query serves as a guiding principle for the school, whose mission is to transcend traditional disciplinary boundaries, seeking to redefine humanities as the comprehensive study of being human. This will involve a multifaceted exploration of the ethical underpinnings of being a human who engages and lives in conjunction with others. And this needs to be done historically, in the present, looking forwards and trying to anticipate the future, and also through personal exploration. The Young Family School will leverage the richness of the entire spectrum of the humanities, and the approach will be disruptive. It will extend across all fields, including science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, what's known as STEM, fostering a unique synergy between humanities and the other disciplines. Through this, we also aim to cultivate students who can bridge the gap between humanistic inquiry and technological advancement, particularly with the oncoming of Gen AI. The focus will be on experiential learning, critical thinking, and fostering a culture of inquiry and debate in a community. This approach encourages students to engage deeply with the material, question existing paradigms, and develop unique perspectives. The Young Family School, in conjunction with the Faculty of the Humanities and Social Sciences, will develop a core group of courses which will be offered to as many students as possible from all across the university. Small study groups led by TAs will read and analyze fundamental texts of various cultures and beliefs, enabling students to develop much-needed reading, interpretation, and writing skills, fundamentally crucial, in my opinion, in the age of AI. The Young Family School will also aim to be a facilitator for research at the intersection of humanities and technology. We hope to encourage collaborations that transcend traditional academic boundaries, fostering partnerships between scholars in humanities, social sciences, and STEM. We are hoping that the Young Family School will be a hub for visiting scholars and scientists from around the world and for international workshops. We are in the initial implementation stages of the Young Family School, and I'm excited to see where all this leads. None of this, however, could have been accomplished without the input, both in thought and in funding, of Toni Young. Okay, you got there before me. And we owe her a debt of thanks and a large round of applause. This session will be moderated by my colleague, Professor Amit Schejter, who is a professor of communication studies at the university and the first head of the Young Family School of Human Experience. He was Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences and then was president of Oranim College. With a first degree in law and a PhD from Rutgers, he was a professor at Penn State and joined our faculty in 2012. He has just returned from a sabbatical in the USA. His research focuses on the relationship between media and justice and analyzes how media policies have an effect on the public interest, minority rights, the unequal distribution of communication resources, and the silencing of the public's voice, in particular, that of members of marginalized communities. He'll be joined on the panel by Toni Young, who does not really need any introduction in the present context. Aside from the Young Family School, Toni has also funded the Writers' House in the old city of Beersheba and the Tin Fellows Program. She is a dedicated supporter of the university and is also chair of the Global Development Committee. She is also the recipient of an undoc from us, from the university. But beyond all that, I have had the pleasure of really getting to know her over the past decade and have benefited much from our conversations, and I'm honored to count her as a friend. Last, but not least, I am tasked with introducing our guest and on-doc recipient this evening, Nicole Krauss. I thought I would take the easy path, went online and looked for a bio. Held by the New York Times as one of America's most important novelists and an international literary sensation, and by the Financial Times as one of the great novelists working today, Nicole Krauss is the author of the international bestsellers Forest Dark, Great House, and The History of Love, blah, blah, blah. And then I read The History of Love from cover to cover, almost without stopping. I laughed, I cried. Literature, the power of literature. And there were moments when I felt I could not breathe. I was Leopold Gursky, and then I was Alma. But which Alma? And what about Bird? I was once also a Lamed Vavnik, but I'll spare you my bio. And Bruno, who was or is a constant companion. And Isaac, the son who did not know, but knew. And father and son, writers both, who become intertwined in the pages of Words for Everything. In the hours I spent between the covers of The History of Love, which book you might ask, I discovered that knedlach are not necessarily the things you put in soup, and that learning how to survive in the wild might not be a bad idea, particularly at this juncture in time. According to the back cover, this wonderful and transformative novel has been translated into over 25 languages. Yet, when you read the book itself, you discover another book by the same name, which was written in Yiddish, copied by hand with some names changed, though not Alma's, translated and published in Spanish, and then translated into English from Spanish, not for the purposes of publication. Languages, words, sentences, paragraphs, even a desk where these are written. That's in another novel, Great House. That is the Nicole Krauss that I want to introduce. Alma, a strange and unusual name to choose for a young girl from Slonim, born before the Second World War in a village in Poland, but a name so pregnant with meaning, an Aramaic word meaning the world. And the worlds Nicole inhabits, the ones she creates when writing, and the real world she writes for, are well worth getting to know. In the aftermath of the 7th of October, Nicole was one of the only Jewish authors to speak out in support of Israel. In a letter published in Haaretz on the 29th of October 2023, she wrote, "As a writer, I am well aware of the power of language. As a Jew, I was taught the value of life, and as a Jewish writer, I have learned to believe that the words we choose help define that life, even connect us to it, even or especially when we are hurting, lonely, or struggling to find meaning in the face of unimaginable loss and anguish." Thank you for being with us today, and I ask you to join Toni and Amit and look forward to hearing all of your thoughts.
Okay, last minute changes, and the microphone is working, so everything is good. Great, thank you. Well, thank you, Chaim, for this very generous introduction. It's for me such an honor and privilege to share the stage with these two women who are so dedicated to the advancement of the humanities and scholarship, and have agreed to share the stage with me. And clearly, I'm sure you'd rather hear their thoughts than mine on this subject. And so I'd really like to address Toni first, okay, and ask you, you know, when you first came up with this idea of giving this generous gift to BGU to establish the Young Family School, what was your vision of this school? What were you thinking?
My vision was really a big concern that the world as I knew it had disappeared. I mean, it was not the same world. And so I started asking myself lots of questions. And the questions are just what was just said. What does it mean to be human? Is there anything unique about us? What are we doing on this planet? And I kept thinking about them and thinking about them. And as you're thinking about them, I ask you to think, what is special about a human being? What defines us? Let me remind you that life continues. Life among plants, we know they can communicate. We have the author who taught us that, President Chavez, but we know that animals can communicate with each other. So what's so great about us? I mean, we tend to have a tendency to think that we are the most important living thing on the planet, and maybe we're not. I found myself asking lots of questions, and the more I thought about them, the more complex they got, and at the same time, I realized that when you get to be of a certain age, you're very lucky because you know how it used to be. And I was feeling that people were so attached to finding new information, which I think is very important, but that they weren't human. They really didn't ask you how you were, what you were feeling, all the things you write about. And so what's human about what we're becoming? All those kind of questions.
Okay, well, this kind of, as if this is not planned, I swear to you it's not planned. This brings me back to the final chapter of Nicole's novel, The History of Love. And Leo is walking towards his meeting with Alma in the park, and I'm not going to spoil the book for you, no spoilers. And he says to himself, now that mine is almost over, I can say that the thing that struck me most about life is the capacity for change. And then later on he continues, there's even a moment when it becomes exhilarating to realize just how little needs to stay the same for you to continue the effort they call, for lack of a better word, being human. So I wanted to ask you, in your eyes, what does it take to be human?
Just a small question.
Yeah, I thought we'd start with the easy ones.
Well, it's reassuring. I don't ever reread my books, and that book was written literally half a lifetime ago. So it's reassuring to know that I was thinking about that question back then, too. I think, first and foremost, we have an ability to ask that question, right, which no other species can ask. And in the asking of that question, we also have language, which allows us not just to express an answer, but to invent our answer to that. So this question that you asked, the answer isn't written, so to speak. What it is to be human is something that we have to decide over and over again. But in the process of finding words for that, it's something that we are inventing over and over again, right? We're enlarging or expanding the answer because, like every species on this planet, to survive, we have to change, right? All literature is ultimately about change. It's about transformation. My oldest son just finished his freshman year at college, and unfortunately took a creative writing class that he loved. And he said to me, I told him that I had a story coming out, and I told him what it was about, and somebody dies in it. And he says, does everything you write have somebody who dies in it? And I said, no, but everything I write is about a moment of change, a moment of transformation. And I think that as human beings, that we can stop and pause and notice that we have to pose that question, who are we? What are we going to be? Is the enormous gift of our species.
So if it were up to you, what would you propose the curriculum of a school like this should have? What should it, what should it include?
Well, so many answers. My mind leaps to one particular answer because I lived in Rome this past year. I'm still living in Rome. And my younger son, who's 16, has been with me all year, and I have dragged him to more museums, to stand in front of more paintings and more sculptures than probably an art history PhD student. And we've both benefited enormously from looking at art together, whether it's been, the iconic things of standing in front of Michelangelo's David, or whether it's small moments and questions in paintings or churches or, the countless archaeological ruins that we've looked at. So my first, obviously I would want to say we need to read literature, and I can go on about that forever, but we also need to look at art. And we also need to look at art and literature in the context of a long history of making art, and of, it is a place in which we have a conjoined effort of asking these questions. Who are we, and who do we want to be?
I would just add that for me, the mystery of it is we think that we know more than all these other species, but do we really? I mean, we don't know what they're communicating to each other, and so then I wonder if we have morphed into a society that is only looking at very important information that comes from the internet. Are we losing the ability, without the humanities, to fully understand what it means to be human? I mean, I would argue that we're at a point right now in time where the world is at a crisis. We're all realizing that AI could be the best thing that ever happened to us, or it could be the worst thing that ever happened to us. And that, to me, means I see more and more people seeing the harm of only looking at information. And I guess I start to fall on the side of thinking that we need to make sure we use AI so that we are the most advanced people on the planet. I think you could argue right now that we are, but the point is a lot of people are very complacent, and they think it's great that they can just have information. They don't know what to do with it. They don't connect it to being human.
Right. Well, two thoughts, and what you said made me think about. One is you were speaking about the ability to sort of understand each other, or as imagine ourselves as, basically empathy, the notion of empathy, having empathy for other species, right? If we are the species who are ruling this planet, and have to accept the difficult place of taking care of other species and of each other, the rest of human beings.
Exactly.
How can we learn empathy? I'm not entirely sure that empathy is a native ability in human beings. Mm-hmm. And I think that, one of the most powerful things that literature does is something that can't think of any other medium or dimension where we can do this. It actually allows us to step into another person's mind and being and body and heart and experiences and past and history. And inside that experience of being so wholly being another person, naturally we learn compassion, and naturally we learn empathy, to throw ourselves into another mind. And if you start reading when you're young, that habit does become innate. It does become sort of native to you. But I'm not sure that if we don't give people the opportunity to practice that through books, through art, that they will have that. And
yeah, I would extend it to so many disciplines within the humanities. History, philosophy, psychology, and I don't know what you think about this, but I started to come to a feeling that maybe the idea is we think of ourselves as part of something, but yet we don't understand that we're part of it until we do. I see the art, dance, music, all of them as our outputs. That's one of the things that appears to be unique. And I'm being careful because I know there are scientists here who really understand that we don't know as much as we think we know about the species. I think this is a time, and I don't know if you accept that idea at all, but that those are the manifestations. I was a literature major. I loved it. But what we're hoping to do in this new school is to make people use everything that's going to help us make this a wonderful world. And I am an optimist because I've been in Israel for 7 weeks. What can I say? You can't not be an optimist if you're in Israel for 7 weeks. Come on. But I think that it's a wonderful, wonderful tool, AI, and I just want to see us recognize that this is the moment for us to use it, what it can do. But I feel that what's very important is I think we're the only species that are so aware of our own bodies. We feel our emotions. And we can't just rule from emotions.
Yeah, well, I think the question of AI is obviously on all of our minds. And I think I'm less optimistic than you. I'm an optimistic person in general, but
You've been in Europe,
I'm less optimistic about AI. But in part because, I mean, AI is obviously not new. We've been living with AI for a very long time,
right.
In fact. And in my lifetime, I think watching the way that digital culture, the culture of the internet, the culture of the algorithm has begun to rule our lives, our choices, our tastes, our sense of ourselves. It's really diminished our options of human being. It's not expanded our options of human being. It's given us access, but access is different. So it's true that now you can grow up in, what is this small town that you grew up in where there? You can grow up there and now have a lot more access than you might have had when you were growing up, or you could grow up, in any number of places and be able to open the internet and see something of the world. But in practice, the way that it is affecting all of us, certainly our children's generation, but really, frankly, all of us, is that it is slimming our options by telling us, here is who you are again and again and again and again, and limiting your scope, your window of the world into what is expected that you are. So the moment you make one choice, two choices, all the other choices come back to you in that limited way. This is you. And when I was growing up, there weren't those. We were limited in other ways. But the way that I learned to define myself was when I was 14, I had an older friend who wrote poetry, and I thought that was cool, and I started to write it. And when I started to write, what I realized at 14, instead of what kids are realizing now going on social media, is it's actually up to me to choose words for myself. And again, not just to express my fury at my parents or my fellow classmates, or they, of course, those parents and those classmates, were deciding who I was in their own eyes. We all feel that as young people, that we're kind of straining against other people's vision of us. But when I started to write poetry at that age, what I realized was I kind of could be anything on the page, right? Because I'm still becoming. So I could even leap to being in Leo Garcia, an old man, which I was 25 when I wrote that. I was a pretty young woman, and so it gives you this option. It expands endlessly your options of who you're going to be. And so what I always say to my kids, to the point where now they say, you're so lucky you grew up without like social media and a phone, because what I say is, my whole generation of friends, really, we grew up writing letters to each other. But the letters weren't just to communicate. They were ways of deciding who we are, who we were going to be as people. I mean, I have stacks. I could cover this floor with the stacks of letters
bring them on.
that I received and I wrote at that age. I still have them, all tied up in ribbons from all my friends and all. And that was our way of deciding. And so it was sort of unlimited to a degree. Language is unlimited in that way, even if you come from, and I keep forgetting the name of that town, but even if you come from there, even if you come from wherever.
But you can see why this is like a marriage made in heaven, because your books speak to so many of the things so eloquently that we're all feeling and hoping to do. And the best is what I believe we can do here, is that we can combine science, which is essential, with the humanities and the sense of purpose of why we want to do this. We want to improve humanity. We're not at our highest point of, this is a pretty dim time. Speaking of literature, I picture sometimes that we're going to be reading about these days on Yom Kippur for the next thousands of years. You know, that's where we are right now.
Well, we need writers to write the things that we're going to read for the next
you're gonna
1,000 years.
You're going to teach us, right?
Oh, I'd be happy to. We have to talk about that.
Well, in a conversation we had a few days ago, you told me that you thought it was important to teach writing.
Yeah.
And in Forest Dark, which is your latest novel, I guess you haven't read that too, but okay. But I did.
I mean, I did read it when I was writing it, but I haven't read it since I published it.
You write out of the mouth of Friedman, which is one of your characters, that in the shtetl they knew the value of a Bashevis singer. However, hard times they made sure he had paper and ink. But here, and you're referring to Israel in that scene, he was diagnosed as part of the disease. They confiscated his pen and sent him to pull radishes in the field. Then, in the same book, later on, you write, and that character is more you say that writing has begun so differently for me. At the age of 14 or 15, I'd grasp it as a way to organize myself, not just to explore and discover, but to consciously grow myself. So, first of all, why do you think we've given up on writing, or have we given up on writing? And do you think that we can teach writing, considering that our students join the university a little older than your son is? So they come here at the average age of 23, Chaim, more or less. Can we still teach them to write?
Yeah. I will first say that character, Friedman, gives a large argument about the value of writing for the Jews, which basically he's saying that because we started writing our own story 2,500 years ago, we've been able to direct our lives. And he's sort of, he's talking about the necessity of continuing to write the Jewish story, and that language has given us enormous power as a people. And of course, I do believe that. We were speaking about my own, I teach sometimes at Columbia in the MFA program, but because I myself never took writing classes and never took an MFA, I've always been ambivalent about the question of whether writers, people who want to become writers, should do MFA programs and take classes, because my fear is that something of the raw originality that one can possess might be lost if you have to keep workshopping by a jury of your peers. But after a lot of thought, the decision I came to teach, and I teach literature, I read with the writing students. We read novels together and talk about what makes them work and why we love them and why we don't. And my feeling is that everyone, no matter whether you want to be a writer or a scientist or a doctor or, pull radishes from the field, should have the opportunity to develop their voice, because without a voice, you have your opportunities are so limited. And when I say voice, I don't just mean how to write a good sentence, to write a letter, a decent email with punctuation. When I say voice, I mean an expression of selfhood. How does one give language to what one feels internally? And the better you can communicate that as a doctor, scientist, writer, radish puller, the happier, the better, the more successful you will be in the world in all of your relationships, in your professional life and your personal life. So in that sense, I came around to thinking, okay, this is, yes, writing should be taught really to everyone from a very young age. And I can say again, I mean, my children had the luck of going to a school where they were taught to creative writing from the time they were 5, you know, poetry classes and all kinds of, and it has made an enormous difference. They know how to write and natively, and that's an enormous boon to have, even in our time of unpunctuated texts.
Okay, well, before we continue to more questions, we also asked around campus, what does it mean to be human? And we thought we'd share 2 minutes of that with you now. Before we continue, you can watch here on the screen, and everybody else can go up there.
מה זה רוח האדם?
שאלה גדולה.
אתה חושב משמע אתה קיים?
מוסריות, ערכים, אתיקה. הגות, פילוסופיה?
אקזיסטנציאליזם.
פילוסופיה, פסיכולוגיה, נראה לי.
אני משחק פינג פונג, שזה כיף. אני לומד, אני נפגש עם חברים. רוח האדם.
את חושבת שהעיסוק ברוח יכול להפוך אותנו לאנשים טובים יותר?
כן, בוודאות.
העיסוק ברוח מאפשר לנו לשאול מי אנחנו רוצים להיות בעולם הזה, ומה הדברים שאנחנו מאמינים בהם, ואיזה מין חברה אנחנו רוצים לייצר.
זה לא כל כך ברור מאליו, ולכן אני חושב שצריך ללמוד את זה, גם בהקשר הספרותי, התרבותי, האמנותי, וגם בהקשר הפוליטי.
הרוח היא העיקר, כל השאר זה אמצעים, כן? בתור מישהו שמלמד גם במדעי הבריאות, אני יודע להגיד לך שהרפואה היום מתקדמת יותר ויותר לכיוון איכות חיים.
אנחנו לא מכונות, אנחנו מייצרים אותן.
יש איזושהי תהייה ואפילו דאגה, לאן העולם הולך.
אנשים בלי מטרה הרבה פעמים הולכים לאיבוד בדרך. זה מה שהופך אותך ליותר מודע, שהופך אותך בעצם להיות יותר טוב.
אנחנו חיים גם במדינה עם המון תרבויות והמון דתות ואנשים שמאמינים בערכים שונים.
אנשי הרוח שלי עם ההורים שלי.
בטח, הרב אביה רוזן.
סבתא שלי, הייתה תקופה שרמב"ם היה מוביל דעת קהל אצלנו בשיעורים.
בדור שלנו זה יותר אנשי אינסטגרם וטיקטוק שמשפיעים עלינו.
אני אחד שלומד מדעים מדויקים, כל נוסחאות, החיים הם לא ככה באמת.
מרכיב מרכזי מאוד זה העניין של הדמיון. החירות לרוץ עם הדמיון שלך. צריך לפתוח את העניין הזה מחדש. נאורות, שזו מילה מקבילה לרוח האדם בתקופה הכי טובה שלה, היא לא דבר מובן מאליו.
אני חושב שזה משהו שאפשר בכלל להשתפר בו, להתחזק בו?
אין סוף. אם אנחנו נמשיך לעסוק ברוח, ובצורה רצינית ולא בצורה צינית, ולא באופן שבו אנחנו מנסים לתרץ לעצמנו את העיסוק ברוח, דברים טובים יקרו.
Wow. And this wasn't staged, spontaneous questioning. So there's another element that Toni brought up, and I thought I want to talk about as one of the dilemmas in the program that we want to offer through the school, and that's the question of history. And a lot of your books talk about history. In the last book, the collection of short stories that, well, appropriately for our conversation is called To Be a Man, okay, maybe to be human. There's a story called Zusia on the Roof. And you write there that history was what happened to other people while the Jews were waiting for the Messiah to come. In the meantime, the rabbis busted themselves with Jewish memory only. And for 2 millennia, that memory has sustained an entire people. So what's the role of history in becoming human?
So that story is, it's about a Jewish historian who's retired, who's had writer's block for years. And that historian, in my mind, was based a little bit on Yerushalmi. I think we were speaking about, where's Jeff? We were speaking about him today, this morning. Some of you may be familiar with his book, Zachor. And the question of, the question that he asks in that very beautiful book, and if you haven't read it, you can turn to just the last page of the book. The last paragraph is absolutely a spectacular paragraph. And he's really posing the question of what happens when this notion of a collective memory, which we have been preserving for so many years, of course in its written form, oral and written form, changes in its modern existence to history. And there's a shift in that notion. And so that the story is kind of a little bit about that idea. While I was writing that story, I was also thinking of a really stunningly beautiful story by Hazaz, written in, I think it was written in 1946, so just before the creation of the state. And it's called The Sermon. Has anyone read that story?
We have to read it in high school. So
really?
We all, yeah.
But
at least in my generation. Probably not today anymore.
I'm fascinated because nobody Israeli I know knows that story. So
nobody knows who Hazaz is, and he got such a great road in Jerusalem, yeah.
He's got such a great road.
So the story, I mean, it's not even really a story. It literally is a sermon, right? And in that, for those of you who haven't read it, it's a meeting in the kibbutz of the kibbutz elders, and yes, and this Yudka, this character Yudka, who's known to not have an education, and he's given the floor. He's been said, "I want to be able to speak," and he gets up and he gives this incredibly impassioned talk after he gets his confidence. And what he says is something along these lines of like, what has history ever done for the Jews? It's just a long history of suffering. If it were up to me, I would say, boys and girls, class dismissed, go out and play. And this internal conflict of what do we do with a tragic history? What do we do with a history of waiting? What do we do? And and our answer for that has come back since that story in many, many different forms. But the answer is, of course, not to forget history. But the question, I think the answer is to continue to have the acute ability to write it, to choose it, to decide it for ourselves, to write it like we've been doing for the last 2,500 years.
So this really takes me to another book of yours, your first book, which is called Man Walks Into a Room. I think it's the only book that isn't connected to Israel in any way. Yeah. Israel isn't mentioned. And there, in this book, and again, I'm not spoiling anything, believe me, for those of you who haven't read it yet, it's a man loses his memory. He only remembers up to his age 12 or 13, and then the rest he's forgotten. And then he takes part in an experience where another person's memory is planted into his mind. And that particular memory that's planted into his mind is traumatic. But it's a trauma that he hasn't taken part in. So basically, he carries a trauma that he's really hasn't experienced. And I'm just wondering, in another direction of looking at this historical discussion, are we such a people? Are we driven by a trauma that we personally hadn't experienced?
I mean, I wonder this often. The question of also epigenetics, right? Because it's not clear what we've experienced and not experienced because of how much has been imprinted on our epigenetic inheritance, right? And so when I grew up, my four grandparents were from Europe, and some of them were refugees from the Holocaust, and their families perished in the Holocaust. And certainly the fear, which turned into a kind of paranoia, of being safe, of not being pursued, of being able to have access to safety and to survival, was something that was in every inch of my childhood, all around me. And I have only come to understand that with time and as a writer and reflecting back on all of that. And so I don't know that you can, I don't know where the experience of trauma ends. I don't think scientifically we yet know the answer to that. We have some sense of its continuity in us. And I think that, part of being a unified people, we are very divided as a people, as Jews. But if we call ourselves Jews, we are unified by a certain history. And part of the pleasures that come with that, and I was speaking to Daniel, my partner, who's here with me, I was saying, when we arrived yesterday, I said, it's really you know, being part of a tribe is a wonderful thing, even with all the problems that come with it. Because I got such a wonderful, warm welcome from everyone here. And there is always that sense of being connected and having friends and family wherever you go. But if you get the benefits of a large protected family and of belonging to a people, you also have to accept its inheritance, right? And you also are responsible for the memory of that. And you also have to accept that you have been shaped by those things. You know, I'm going to tell a tiny little story that some of you may like and some of you may not, but I have a friend who's Israeli, who's also a writer, and I won't name, but who has, you know, a wonderful theory about all this. And his mother survived the Holocaust in part because she was, when a Nazi sort of came for her, she had a piece of broken glass and kind of used it to defend herself. And he said, everybody in Israel has survived. Only the crazy ones survived. That's why this country is, you know, is what it is. And I think the fact of the matter is we are survivors. There's no way around that we are survivors. And I think, you know, there's a reckoning with that comes with who we are. And I think that you know, unfortunately, that's going to go on for a long time.
Toni, we talked about this aspect of Nicole's book the other day.
Yes, we did. Yes, and I told it to my family because it's so striking. I hadn't read that one. But the idea that there would be something in your brain that doesn't feel like it really belongs there. And I guess that's some of what I'm concerned about. If we don't encourage, I think one of the things that the human race has done so well is to try to improve itself. And I think that we can become something unbelievable if we use the AI to do the things that only AI can do. And then at the same time, we require people to understand how important history has been to us and learn all of the lessons of history. Especially right now, because we're at a dead end right now, I think.
I think I'm going to speak about this tonight, but I wouldn't call it a dead end, I would call it a crossroads. We're at a crossroads.
That's fair, right. But we need, I think, to say that the way we can be best as a Jewish people somehow is to paste over our differences right now and think of this in the broadest possible sense. We've got to save what we've taught the world, is that you're not going to just persecute the little guy. We're going to make this fair. But I also think that anybody who really is serious about learning understands, once they understand their humanity, how can they not recognize that every human being is basically the same? We're made up of the same thing. And one thing that I've come to believe is that we feel emotions. I don't know, I'm sure we have bodies. I can't visualize a world where AI could feel what's coming from a body. They don't have bodies. And I think they can describe them. I think they will describe them excellently, but people like you are going to make us understand how that makes us human, that we understand that the thing that looks like us, which is a variation of a mammal, or is like us. We have to treat everybody well. And that's one of my hopes.
So, wow, there's so much discussed today. And it's, I'd like to kind of try to think, are we kind of maybe forcing our perceptions as, you know, we come from this old generation and forcing this young generation now to be, you know, I think maybe in a previous conversation you and I had, we talked about the fact that we have a generation growing without books. Are we forcing this new generation to be exposed to something that is not relevant to them anymore? And maybe we're over trying. Maybe we should just give up.
Well, we forced them to do a lot of things already. So we forced cell phones on them. It wasn't their choice. I mean, it's sometimes, I have a 19-year-old and a 16-year-old, as I said, and it frustrates me sometimes when people speak so negatively of their generation because it really wasn't their choice. You know, they've been guinea pigs in a really, really terrible psychological, technological, social experiment. Not just with cell phones, but in many, many things that these children have grown up with that we didn't. And I think that they are suffering because of it. And I don't think we then abandon them and say, okay, this is who you are now. You're not interested in books, so I get you know something that we don't after 3,000, 4,000 years, so I guess go with it, guys. Right? I mean, and given that we had the benefit of growing up many of us, with books, with letters, with learning how to write, with spending time with ourselves, with learning how to be alone and the values of being alone. You can't be creative if you can't be alone. And it's very hard for young people to be alone. So we have to look at all of those questions that it was our work. You know, the other day I saw a video of children in France who were given up, water was considered dangerous, the water wasn't safe, so they were given wine as 5-year-olds in kindergarten. Up to 4 glasses of wine they were allowed a day. And I think, you know, that's what we're going to look back and think, this is what we were giving them, we were letting them smoke and drink, you know? Yep. And 5 and 6, and, you know, I see kids in strollers going by with the phone in their face. So we don't abandon them now. That's not the answer.
Well, great. Well, thanks to Toni's optimism, which we've heard of here, I think you both believe that this is all reversible in any way, in some way.
I don't think anything is totally reversible, okay. But I do believe in repair. I believe in the possibility of repair, okay. And I believe in the possibility of progress. And we need to recognize the problems, and then we can repair.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that the effort is worthwhile. And
exactly.
Thanks to you, Toni, it will hopefully work out.
Thank you. Thank you. You were great.
So, I really want to thank the both of you for your time and for your really thoughtful comments. From what I understand, the next activity is recognizing our loyal friends and supporters. It is out here in the Minkoff Family Senate Court, and Hadass or whoever gives instructions here will tell you which way to go. It's up here, and thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.